There she is.
Yeah, there she is. Hey, everybody, welcome to the monthly art talk at the Sasse Museum. This month, we're taking a look at Sasse's newest catalog, which is of the paintings of Dina Miller. And Kate Flannery did the copy for it. My name's John Branningham, but I thought we could introduce both Dina and Kate. And I think probably the best way to do that is for you to introduce yourself. I just a bit of a warning. We're having a little bit of technical trouble today. My computer a few minutes ago just completely froze up, and I was out for a couple of moments. And there's a little bit of delay coming across the Atlantic for Dina, who's in Bristol.
I can see and hear you very clearly.
Okay.
So everything seems to be okay this end at the moment.
So Dina, would you mind introducing who you are and just any way you want to introduce yourself?
Well, yeah, I guess I am an artist. Yes, and I've lived in Bristol since 1975 actually, and I've had a varied career as an artist. I've done exhibitions in galleries and independent ones. I'm largely self-taught, and I've taught others, and I paint in all kinds of different styles and subjects. I don't stick just to one thing. I might do still lives, landscapes, fantasy images, things from the subconscious, light-hearted frivolous things and serious subjects. I'm very influenced by other artists, art history. I didn't go to art school in the normal sense. I did a history of art course at the University in Bristol, 1975 to 8. And I think that formed the bedrock of what kinds of images I work with, because you spent 3 years looking at art from the Greek times up to the 20th century and looking at different artists in great detail sometimes. And I found that has a profound influence on my own work, because the more I work as the years go by, the more I look back and appreciate the art of the past and what it can contribute to the present and the future. And I'm always interested in the relationship between art and society and how that changes and evolves, and the difference between what might be fashionable.
I think we're losing your audio, Dina.
Yeah, we've lost the audio.
Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm yes, what stands the test of time? For instance, art of the Renaissance has stood for a long time, 500 or 600 years, and is still very influential, even if people aren't aware of it. And I think if I painted something and then a few hundred years later, somebody was influenced by it, part of in their own work, it would be a very great compliment to one. So there's a lot of the part in what I do. I also observe when you do landscapes, yes, you look at the real world. And landscape, yes, is deeply affecting. It's a very profound subject. I think all the subjects are still life and people, but probably people make up the bulk of my work, of the things I do. I could pick people in all kinds of different contexts, from sort of group, drawn mainly to symbolize theatrical things, as the visuals gone a bit. There are lots of, it can just be a blank scene. Processions, theatrical, everyday subjects, and caricature interests me quite a lot. Portraiture, I have done portraits, but I prefer to choose who I do portraits of. And one of the most interesting projects I did was in the late 80s of some very severely physically and mentally handicapped people in a small institution outside of Bristol.
We've lost the audio for you again.
Is it gone? Is that back again, John?
It's back now, yeah.
Because the screen went blank for a couple of seconds, and I don't know whether that got lost, what I was saying. But I was talking about portraiture for a moment and saying that I do like painting portraits, but I prefer to choose who I do the portraits of rather than somebody come to me that I don't know and paint them. So I did a series of portraits for various women and various people that for some reason I did one of the last one, the series one, it was Amy Winehouse after she died, the singer. But many years in the late 80s, I was saying, I did a series of a big painting, a group painting of some severely physically and mentally handicapped people, which is not an easy, only because I knew a psychiatrist who gave me permission to do that. In fact, she asked me to do it because it's not easy to get permission, because obviously very handicapped people can't give you permission, so you have to get it from their parents. And that was a really interesting experience of doing portraiture. And I haven't got the original, but I've got a very good photograph of it. It's quite a big painting. There were 37 of them.
Okay.
Got to know them. And the process of looking at them and drawing them was deeply personal, because I was aware they were very self-conscious. So I would only do a little sketch for maybe 30 seconds. And then from that, I worked with the painting. But the work I'm currently doing is actually sort of religious. Actually, I'm quite interested in doing a series of religious-based subjects of biblical stories. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. In pen and ink, I do a lot of pen and ink at the moment, but I've done a lot of oil painting, pastels, watercolors, pencil work. Whatever takes my sort of not fancy exactly, but what I know if I'm doing a subject for a few months or a year, if I just feel myself getting a bit stale or just repetitive, I stop. You know, I know it's time. I've done.
Okay, we've lost you again.
Yeah, it's not better.
Yes, you need to talk louder too, Dina.
Did that make any sense? Because I was just sort of rather ad-libbing it.
Yeah. So yeah, Kate, I wonder if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Kate Flannery, and I'm a writer and also a lawyer in Claremont. And I've done some writing of poetry, flash fiction, a few short stories, and I've done some creative nonfiction as well. And this particular project that Jean approached me with was unusual in that I have written several smaller pieces for various catalogs that Jean has put out, but I've not approached an entire catalog and tried to write something about that. And one of the things that really impressed me as I was looking at Dina's work and going online and reading about her and seeing videos and trying to get a sense of her work was, as I said in the introduction, the main introduction, the breadth of it. And she's just described it beautifully. The different kinds of things that interest her and the different sorts of things that she does. And I think the catalog that Jean put together is really a kind of an extraordinary cross-section of her work, in that it involves people, landscape, architecture, still life, fantastic work, and different mediums, oils, pastels, watercolors, pen and ink. And so as I was approaching this catalog and trying to get a sense of how to organize the writing, it was really trying to just get my arms around it was part of the initial battle. And I found that basically taking the various genres that she worked at and rather than addressing each particular piece in each particular category, that really the best way to approach it was to write. It's what I call writing to the artist. Instead of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with ekphrastic writing. It's basically writing that's in response to a piece of art. That's traditionally what it is. Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn is the usual example that comes up. So a writer comes in, takes a look at a piece of art, and responds to it, and then writes something in response to that art. And it's a wonderful thing for a writer to be able to do, just to walk in, take a look at something, and go. But I didn't think that that was the right approach for Dina's work, since there was so much of it. It was so broad and so deep. And so I found myself, as she and I worked through various conversations, we had about 4 or 5 Zoom meetings. I found myself really, instead of writing to her art, I wrote to her as an artist. And it was an interesting kind of variation on the theme of ekphrastic writing. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think it was the right approach. And Jean and I talked about that, Dina and I talked about that, and it just evolved, and it was a wonderful experience for me. So this is really the culmination of a great time that I had.
Well, would you say that the catalog too is an expression of that? It really captures the totality of her as an artist.
I think so, and I think this was Jean's purpose at the beginning. I mean, I think he was drawn to her work, and I mean, obviously, I don't want to put words in Jean's mouth, but he was drawn to her work, and the trick is, I think, in any curatorial effort, is to figure out how are you going to put this all together. And he really, I think, did a masterful job in this, in capturing the breadth and also some of the wonderful details in your work.
Dina, do you feel they captured you as the whole Dina?
I do. I think it was really a very difficult thing to do, because I know how varied my work is, and that I know for galleries, a lot of galleries don't want to touch my work because there's so many different kinds of strands to it that it's confusing for them. But yes, and to see somebody able to actually put together such a range, and yet it's coherent. So somebody who never seen my work before can go through it one at a time and have a sense of some sort of thread of connection, meaningfulness. It's not too juxtaposed, too sort of jarring. No, I was really impressed, and a couple of people who've seen it over here are really, really, really deeply impressed by that. By the selection. I think it's a very sophisticated and yet very accessible result. I can't thank you enough. I think nobody's done that before. I think that's quite you've got quite an eye for images, and yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah. We can. Why don't we take a look at the catalog and maybe talk about it? My first reaction was how it felt like Renaissance art to me. It was just powerful. Yeah. And then I realized it felt like an Italian Renaissance depiction, and then it was Bristol, which I found both wonderful and shocking. And do you live in Italy? That must have influenced the way you look at things.
It does, yes. I mean, that's a very classic view of Bristol. It hasn't changed. In fact, I live up there by the top of there, by the houses at the top. Out of my back window, I can sort of see the tip of the bridge on the side. And yeah, when I was painting it, I decided I wanted to do what I call a very conventional painting of it. Not too expressive, not too quirky. Very limited palette, and I did some drawings, and then I actually used a postcard, a very good quality photograph of a postcard to get the actual tones, because I didn't do it sitting there, I did it in this room. And the postcard, which I've still got, was a fabulous reference to the tones, the subtleties between the trees and the buildings. And it took a couple of days, and then I got something happened, and I didn't finish it, and I left it for about a year, and then I realized if I went back and started fiddling with it and adding to it, it would change it completely, so I just left it. And the foreground is really quite it's quite impressionistic. But I think the more I see it, it's hanging up here. It's been very admired, but so yeah, I'm not pleased with it, but it's something I've done. And I'm very fond of Bristol, but I prefer Italy. So that's yeah, and I love doing the reflections in the water. But sadly, they're going to build on the side of this area of the middle of high-rise buildings now, which is such a shame because that view will kind of go. But that's what happens. Yeah. Is there any question you want to ask about the process of painting the picture, or?
Well, you talked about the limited palette a little bit, and clearly using a limited palette here, and it has a tremendous effect. I'm wondering how you choose that palette.
It's basic. I stick to about 4 different colors. Any more for painting like that, I think there might have been 4, because it's 20 years ago, I can't quite remember. I think it might have been an ultramarine, a sienna, an umber, and an ochre, and maybe just a hint of a green, but I can't really remember. But it was very limited, because I learned a long time ago that the 4 colors are enough. Because with oil painting, that you can get so many different hues with just a few colours. To have more than 4 can be very confusing. I mean, I was saying, even Renaissance painters only use about 4 pigments. But it's hard today to get quality pigments. So I do spend quite a lot on getting expensive pigments, the ordinary Winsor and Newton ones I rarely use now. I've used John Harding, Michael Harding, and Roberson, and Seymour, Pip Seymour paints, which I don't know if you can get them there, but we can get them here. But and I use glazes sometimes, but I haven't used a glaze on this painting.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, and sometimes before painting, when I think the background ochre or a soft grey, just use yellow ochre with a rag and just some turps, and just so it's not totally white painted into. But it's knowing when to stop painting sometimes. But, that's me being very conventional.
Yeah, well, if you don't stop, it becomes muddy, right? I mean.
Yeah, but then I think it's important to work. Some paintings you have to just keep on going at, and even if you destroy it, you find some.
Oh, we lost you.
I think with oil painting, the fascination of it. I think am I back again?
Yes, you're back now.
I mean, the fascination with oil painting is there are so many.
I'm sorry, we've lost you again.
I was saying with oil painting is fascinating because there are so many different effects you can get with it. Yeah, what's happening with the audio?
Okay.
Have we gone? Are we off again?
We're in and out, but you're talking about with oil paintings, you can get so many effects, and you can
different. And the usual principle is to start painting thin, like a watercolor, and then as it dries, you paint another layer and then another layer. So with oil paintings, it's best to have several to work on at the same time, because it can take days for some, depending on the temperature, the time of year and things, for things to dry. And what I've found when I've been in France and Italy and Spain is that because it's very hot, you can paint quite quickly. You can do an oil painting in a day and it dries in a way that you can't do in England. And that's how the Impressionists did a lot of their paintings. They could actually go outside and start painting in the morning and paint for several hours. And by the afternoon, the paint would actually be quite dryish enough to start building up impasto with either a palette knife or a brush, and just go paint quite thickly and expressively. Wow. Not so easy in England. But it depends what sort of paint. I mean, when I was teaching, it would always be, I'd find out what somebody what sort of techniques, what sort of style, what subjects, and direct my teaching to that rather than address the whole class. We're going to all do this because it doesn't always suit everybody to do the same thing. But yeah, I guess I've got some of the techniques I use, I actually remember from school. I had a very good art tutor at school. Even though I was a truant, I used to go to the art classes. And he was very good at teaching oil painting, the basic techniques. So when you're painting edges of something, like you're doing a still life or buildings, you paint over the edge to the other side of it. Like you're painting a jug or a cup, you don't just draw it and then paint it right to the very edge of that. You just overlap, so the paint actually sort of that bonds together. But again, Renaissance painting, early altarpiece painting would be very precise. But it depends very much on what effect, if you've got something in mind that you want to paint or draw. This, yeah, it's just me, it's just over, yeah. That's France, you can probably know. A very quick pastel of a big view. As I love pastels, I think pastels are to the French what watercolors are to the English. And yeah, I can remember sitting there and just thinking, I'm just going to do it in one go. So it took maybe about 30 or 40 minutes. Again, limited, I just used the pastels I got. And pastels, for me, it's people like that picture a lot. But to me, it's just a kind of working pastel and just doing what was there. It's a very big landscape with great big fields and little trees, and the blue sky and the hill to the left. And pastels, yeah, I don't know if you do pastels. Yeah, the drawing there, that's Italy. I was saying with pastels, Degas did a lot of pastels. You can build up layers with pastels. Oh yes, the baptistry in Pisa with a leaning tower in the background. Yeah, that's
yeah, let's take a look at some of those. Now you've got your landscapes. Maybe we take a look at some of your other styles. Let's take a look at the still lifes. And I know that Kate, you were drawn to these as well. I'm wondering about your initial impressions with these, Kate.
Yeah, my initial impression of them was that they were so very, very calming. And the way she would take just everyday items that would be on anybody's table or something. I don't think she arranged them. I think they were just there and she just threw them together. I love the one on the left right there, the potatoes with the sort of shadowy pomegranate off to the side that is so luminous and almost sparkles. It's such a wonderful contrast. And that one in particularly was maybe it's because I cook, but it was so calming and soothing in the sense of, particularly these days when everybody is confused and we're not getting information about what's going on in terms of the pandemic. And here are those potatoes, and it's very reassuring. And I in my conversations with Dina, we talked about these things, and she said a really remarkable thing, which was she thought that people needed these kinds of paintings these days, that they satisfied a need. And in the introduction, I talk a little bit about some of the history of still lifes and all of that. But for Dina, I think, and she can certainly speak to this herself, but I think it's that her ability to sense a need in society or in a culture to have something that is peaceful and calming and soothing, and just a kind of reminder of something that we need in our lives these days.
Well, and talk about something that's soothing. This picture is I don't know. I'm very much drawn to it. Right. I'm a dog person though. Dina, is this pastel? Is this watercolor or oil?
Oil painting. It's on the wall behind me. it's an oil painting on very thick, it's on very heavy canvas, and the paint is quite, I think I did it literally in one go.
Oh, wow.
And just, it was an image that I did initially in the early 80s, a long time ago, in pastel, and I did do small paintings of it. I've got about several dozen pastels of the image in itself, and I did it, and then it wasn't for only a few years later that I realized actually why the picture evolved, that happened the way it did. Because a childhood tragedy experience, and we had a family dog who I found very comforting, with a Labrador boxer cross, and he was such an important thing in my life as a child. And so I think that's how that image came about. But again, it has an appeal. People tend to be attracted to it because it's comforting. And I think what Kate was saying about still life is so true. I think, to divert from that, I think that's why Impressionist paintings still exert such an influence on people, because they depict everyday subjects with people eating, drinking, walking in the street, or just sitting, chatting, in a very natural, easy way that almost seems impossible to paint today. You don't see people painting people very often just in their lives, just sitting in the room or whatever they might be doing. And I think I have a kind of, not theory, but just an observation that I think the First and Second World Wars so shattered society that it's very difficult to return to that kind of everydayness, and I think something has been affected humanity very deeply, and that's why those paintings, I know I don't know how it is in America, but in Europe, they still, if there's an exhibition of Impressionist paintings in a major gallery like London or Paris, more people will go to see them than any other paintings. They will just go in their droves to want to see them, because it's the presence, being in the presence of the original painting as well has an effect on people. I remember going to an exhibition of Monet's. You had to queue up, and it was so crowded. People just wanted to see those lovely paintings of landscapes and haystacks and gardens and trees and rivers.
And then we have another influence. This is people, which we're talking about a little bit before. These portraits I find it's fascinating. Kate, maybe you could talk about your reaction to these as well.
Well, for me, I mean, the sort of Renaissance, my favorite periods in art history, and I was fortunate enough to be able to study art history all through high school for the 4 years, and it's really the sort of structure and composition and this wonderful sense of balance that often appears in Renaissance paintings, where you have this with groupings of people, particularly there's a wonderful flow that is still very controlled and just lovely. This one I think could have easily have gone into the fantastic section, I think, as well, even though it's people. I love the title of it, Second Sight. And it's just one of those things that strikes you as you look at it and you think, what is going on there? But if you spend time with it, you'll have a sense maybe of past and present and future and influences on a person's vision or mind processes. Dina's work, I think, really gives you so many opportunities to just take off and see what you can in these paintings.
Yeah, and the yellow here, it's extraordinary what she's done with this. It's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, okay. Maybe take a look at this. So I'm wondering about influences here. I see some of these early 20th century artists coming through here, at least on the right.
The Little Nativity is by Gentile da Fabriano, I think an Italian 15th century artist. That's basically his composition. And I just put an image from a photograph by Karl Blossfeld, the photographer. He used to photograph enlarged plants, and it just seemed like the right thing to put in that little nativity scene as something, a symbol of something to look at. And the girls on the other side is quite a lot. It's a group of society girls sitting in a sitting room before going into a party or a ball or something. I followed. It's from a photograph actually in a Hello magazine, one of those society magazines where they have celebrities and things. Well, I was in a dentist in waiting room, and have I come back? Can you hear?
You're good.
Yeah. I was sitting in the dentist's waiting room and I'm flipping through the magazine and I saw that and I was very naughty. I just had to have it. So I took it out of the magazine because I knew it would make a painting. When I look at a lot of, say, magazines or articles or newspapers, when I see something that I know could be relevant to something, it just works as a composition. And so yeah, I painted that, and it was quite an interesting exercise doing it because it's these rich girls sitting there all dressed up waiting to go and have something happen. They're all individual, different sort of aspects of characters came to mind, and I didn't follow the costumes and colours very closely, but certainly they were all sitting almost exactly in those poses. And yeah, it's finished. I mean, sometimes with some oil paintings, I'll go back and finish them years later. That's another whole aspect of painting. But yeah, it's supposed to be a bit humorous, a bit sort of tongue-in-cheek, not to be taken too seriously, but you know, I don't know what else to say about it really. It's in Italy actually, I painted that in Italy, it's still there. I might go and do some more to it, I don't know. When I see it, sometimes when you leave an oil painting and you don't look at it for some months or even years sometimes, you know something about it isn't right and you need to, and then suddenly you look at it and you see exactly what it is you've got to do to it to make it complete, to improve it. And that's quite common with painters. I think a lot of painters would say that oil paintings particularly, you can go back and work on it. Not drawings so much, although you have to be really sure with drawings. With drawing and painting are very different. I think very different mental processes. But, again, I chose the palette for the ones of the girls quite carefully. Yep, and these ones, yes, they're very serious subject. For the one with the mother is from, I think, the war in Iraq, 2003, and I got that from the internet, but not in the newspaper. When the war happened, I had a feeling I'd do some paintings about it, but I didn't have an idea how that would evolve. And then I saw pictures in the newspaper and magazines, and I did some work from those. I was very quick to realise that they wouldn't put in the newspapers some of the more harrowing aspects of war. So I started looking on the internet, and there was a lot there. I don't think you'll find the site so easy now, but at that time I printed them off, and I've got about 50 paintings on that subject, war. And I've had a couple of exhibitions of them to raise money for charities associated with war, particularly MSF and soldiers organisations, wounded soldiers. But they're not pictures people would ever live with in their homes, really, because it's too harrowing. But people really like to see them. I had a big exhibition in a big cafe bar here, the Tobacco Factory, in 2010. And more people went to see that than any other exhibition. The bar taking went up a lot, I think. And I put some of the really harrowing ones in with the proviso that if some of the mums and children found them too much we could take them down, but they didn't. They were quite okay with them.
And I think people want to see these sorts of real moments.
Yeah, and it was also a challenge because they were from photographs. Because people said to me, "Did you go to a war zone?" I said, "No, I would never get. It would be very difficult to go." I know quite a lot about war artists, and I would just be a liability if I went. But working from the photographs, it's sort of a lot of people said I didn't know they were from photographs because they're not exact copies, but there's something in the way I paint them that they don't look as though they've been done necessarily from a photograph. But they were very upsetting to do. Sometimes you had to suspend your emotions. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this.
The volume's gone.
No, you're fine. I'm thinking about those World War I artists and the way they painted war and the way they brought war, the brutality of the war to life. And I'm wondering about their influence on you.
Yes, I don't know if I was. They didn't personally influence my style, but the integrity of the situation. Today, I mean, in the First World War, it wasn't difficult for an artist to actually go with the army, to go and risk. It was quite risky, but people, if you wanted to go, you could go, and if you knew somebody in the military world, that would make it easier. I would say up until about 30 years ago, you could, if you knew somebody in like a sort of a captain or somebody in the army and you wanted to go, you had to get permission from the MOD and the army, and then you sort of self-funding, you can maybe pay your fare and your way. And then Peter Howson went, a British artist, about 20 years ago, to various war zones, and yeah, you can sketch and draw, take photographs and do that, but now it'd be incredibly difficult. You know, it's very, wars are very close things to get into, but actually being there it will be obviously awful. But so that's why I did them, and it was not like any other subject I've done, because I get very upset doing the faces of the children, go in the kitchen, have a bit of a sob, and then go back and get on with the painting, which was just really technical process, yeah. Also very emotive. And then after I'd done about maybe 40 paintings, then I've got about maybe 100 drawings from paintings. I began to a little mechanical. I thought, no, you can't just treat it like going to do a landscape or another still life. Use that kind of self-discipline. It's time to go to work, and it's time to stop and maybe return to it a few years later. So I haven't done any, but I've looked at some of the drawings, and I think I might return to it. This one, yes, fantastic.
We dipped our toe into some painful subjects there, and maybe we can come back to something happier. Yeah, and I know, Kate, you had a lot to say about the fantastic pieces.
Yeah,
we were talking about this last week.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. They really are, and yet they're also, they can be quite serious. You know, this is one: birth, growth, and decay. I mean, there it is, right in front of us there, with its sort of shocking colors and all. I think also, Dina, I remember you talking about burlesques and this idea of sort of circus and carnival and people being on a stage as something that sort of keeps coming back in your work, which is such a wonderful idea, wonderful theme that even Shakespeare talked about, and it's really so much a part of what I see in your work, in the fantastic art. It's just it's really kind of astonishing. Very, I think you've called it whimsical, and yet it's not. I mean, first impression, whimsy, but if you look at it seriously, it's not. I mean, take a look at that.
Yeah, lots of fairies. I think it's a sense of exuberance. It's
yeah.
I had an exhibition called, and I called it Exuberance, and I put in just paintings that were fantastical and full of color and energy and imagination. And again, I think there's a need in people for that, to satisfy something of the imagination, because we don't, maybe we're not in touch with our imagination. I don't know, but yeah, for some reason, when I did this painting, I was very into fairies and the sort of little creatures and small little things that are very insect and odd creepiness and weirdness, but yet fun. That was frivolous and yet it also had a lot of meaning. Even if you don't understand it, you have a sense that there's some sort of purpose to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's
sort of play. Yeah.
there's certainly playfulness, but we've got the Madonna on one side and a sort of gas masked figure on the other, and there's and of course an opossum with somebody riding her at the bottom, which is, there's a lot going on here. It's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and you can see the burlesque here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, I love doing burlesque, sort of theatrical groups of people, audiences. Yeah. It's the audience and the performer, the relationship between the two. Yeah.
This might be a good time to open up for questions from anybody who might have them, or follow some ideas, or maybe what struck you about these paintings. Does anybody have any questions? Ken, you're muted.
Well, I can understand your questions aren't always easy to suddenly come up with, are they? I mean, it's
I think Ken will have one here.
Okay, there we go. So this is not so much a question. I have some of those too, but that book is so dang good to cover your work, which is just goes miles and miles in every direction. But I was looking at the fantasy pictures, and it's almost like Hieronymus Bosch and Salvador Dali conspired to make these. And there is a note of whimsy, but my God, they are like political cartoons and social commentary, and they're so multidimensional. They're amazing. So that was that. But what I wanted to get back to in form of a question was, what really motivates you as an artist? What is it that's burning inside you that draws you to paints and drawings and stuff?
I think it's to communicate. And it's like, I don't have the ideas have me. It's like, I don't think you can will things all the time to happen, or the willpower plays. I think sometimes just an idea, there is something in me that wants to communicate this like feast of pictures that I've looked at ever since I was a child. I was about 6 when I started looking. My mother had some little books of artists, and I looked at them and I was fascinated. Some of them were Titian and Rembrandt, and some of them were Toulouse-Lautrec and Picasso. And I suddenly had a realization. I thought, people do this all day, sort of paint and draw. And that kind of stuck in me subconsciously, And so as I got up, I at university, I looked at different pictures. And it's like a hinterland of imagery that I can draw on, that just comes into my mind sometimes. But can't will it. It has to be something that feels right to be doing at the time. And if people enjoy them, that gives me a lot of pleasure. And the different levels, from the serious to the more whim things to make people think. but it's not something I can consciously plan. It's evolved. Does that answer the?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very interested in psychology, the relationship between the conscious and unconscious. I read a lot of. I had a lot of mental illness in my family, and so I read a lot of books by Jung and various therapists and thinkers in these things. And I think that's had a lot of influence on how I work and how I approach what I do. But I would say so, yeah. And there's always more to do. Yeah, I feel very, very flattered that you like them. But, it's important for one's work to be seen, because I think there are so many good artists whose work doesn't get seen, and I always try to encourage people to show their work, and I think there's a huge outpouring of art in the last 50 years from all sorts of people all over the world, and I think that there's something very important about that. And I'd like to think more about that, because over here lots of people paint and draw, and I taught for 18 years, not full time, but most adults, total cross section of people. And some of them stayed the whole 18 years that I was teaching. And I could see how people could develop through it. And I learned an awful lot from the teaching process myself. And that's a whole other talk, actually. That's very interesting. But yes, and so I know lots of people who paint and draw. They don't know why they do it, but they just do it, and I sometimes go around and encourage them to do it in a little group or something. I'm always open to advice or, you know, just technical information or encouragement. Or, it's not always easy to do it. You know, a lot of people want to do it, but it's not easy to get started. But once you start it, it's happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
John, I have a question for Dina that it sort of is born of some of our previous conversations. I know I've heard you say a couple of times, Dina, that if you show me a piece of art or a collection of art from a particular culture or civilization, I can tell you something about that or civilization. And I'm wondering, taking that a step further, what do you think the art in our culture today, in our society today, will tell future generations about us? What's the state of our art, and what does it tell people?
I think it's changing. I mean, I can see already changes in the system of the way art is. The digital world, the computer, has dramatically changed the way people see art, and that's multifaceted sort of topic or issue. But I think there's this outpouring of art by ordinary people that maybe never had the opportunity to paint in the past in different times, is symbolic of a need for a big narrative. That because art in the Renaissance was largely, it was patrons, people paid, artists. It was such a different climate for artists to be in. And in the 20th century, we had the art schools. I don't know how it is in Europe, all these art schools. But in a way, it's kind of state art, because the art schools are funded by the state and the tutors are trained by the state. And the artists that come out of it, like Damien Hirst, Tim, some of the big names we know, have been actually, when you look at it, trained by the state, because they've been to art schools. And there's a lot of snobbery attached to art in Europe. And there's also a lot of mavericks and people who work outside the system. But I think we haven't got a grand narrative. I mean, religious art used to was a grand narrative, history, myth, even if people didn't understand exactly what was going on in those paintings. When you go to the National Gallery in London, 30,000 people a day in the summer will actually go into that building and look at pictures. Because I used to go a lot, I used to go at least once, 2 or 3 times a month sometimes to London to look at the galleries. And it would fascinate me to see thousands of people just going past these pictures, looking at them and knowing they were seeing something important, but not necessarily understanding in detail what it was. But now, obviously, with the pandemic stuff, they can't go. But and how accessible that would be to people. So I think we don't have a we don't have a big narrative to. And also, the world, it's a global world now. I mean, you can travel, you can't at the moment, but you know, everything is kind of joined up. You can see what's going on the other side of the world immediately, that you couldn't do 100 years ago. So I think we're in a time of huge flux and change with art. But I think it recently came to me very clearly that this huge outpouring, because I know the art shop in a couple of art shops in Bristol during the pandemic have been incredibly busy. They've been selling lots of drink deliveries home to paint and paper and stuff to people because they're stuck indoors, and so there's quite a lot of stuff online, little classes people can do, and you know, I've got a little group of people that I still keep in touch with and help them do things. But it's really quite encouraging to see that happening. What the actual, whether it'll survive, because a lot of art doesn't actually survive. A lot of it gets destroyed. When people die, it gets, you know, families. When I was teaching, a lot of people would say what they're going to do with their paintings. They say, my children don't want it, they're going to put it on the skip. I used to put them off and they go, if your mom or, you know, it's gone through all this effort, you really ought to value it, you know, look at it, and they think about it. But yeah, it's an interesting time, but art does reflect society. And I don't think we know what kind of society we're in at the moment. I could be wrong, but so something will come out of this that will be good. It might not feel like it at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of unhappiness over here. A lot of people are not happy, and it's definitely due to what's going on in our government and lockdowns. And it's really very weird.
It makes art, especially this kind of art that's so personal, makes it important, you know.
It is, and I think online, I think Jean doing these catalogues, I really think that's the way to go, because people can see, even in their own, just looking online and being able to have access to see things that just makes them momentary feel better. Also, it has a much more profound effect than you realise what you actually see. It forms part of your mindset and your psyche. It does affect you, and so I think it can only get bigger and greater, and I think it's good to see it happening. I don't know anybody else doing what Jean's doing, and the standard of the design is, you've got a couple of friends here who've seen it, been really impressed with the design aspects, and very important. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
that's an art in itself, actually.
Yeah.
I did a 1-year course in illustration and graphic design in the early 80s, and yeah, graphics is a whole specialization in itself.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great statement, and I think that's a good place to end for this month. And thank you so much, Dina. Thank you so much, Kate.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Round of applause here.
And thanks, Jean and John.
Hi, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. You're great.